I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh.
I grew up under the sterile white light of the laboratory. The certainty of equations, the harsh reality of microscopes was my normal. Religion was either a story from the dusty pages of the past or the solace of the weak. At least I thought so. Until I realized that there was a but hidden in the perfect chaos of the universe. I would have to see that crack hidden in the perfect equations of the universe to realize that I was wrong.
Dear audience, are you a heart that seeks peace? Then you are in the right place. On this channel, you will witness the inspiring stories of those who have converted to Islam from different religions. Each story is a story of a quest, a transformation, and a spiritual awakening. Join these journeys that warm your heart and raise your soul with the calling voice of the Adhan. Subscribe, because every story is a new beginning.
As a scientist, I used to think faith and reason were opposite until I discovered the harmony within Islam. Growing up in the cold, sterile air of the laboratory wouldn't be an exaggeration. My father was a quantum physics professor, and my mother was a researcher with a doctorate in biochemistry. Dinner table conversations at home usually revolved around the latest scientific discoveries, peer review processes, and the status of research grants. By the time I was 8, I was learning to examine cell structures under a microscope. By 10, I could understand basic chemical reactions. For a child growing up in this environment, religion was, at best, a relic of the past, and at worst, a collection of irrational superstitions. My parents weren't openly atheist. They were more like indifferent agnostics. The prevailing logic at home was, science gives us facts. Religion only provides comfort. In high school, I excelled particularly in math and physics. The perfect harmony in equations and the universal applicability of physical laws fascinated me. I thought the universe worked like a clock, and everything could be explained by mathematical formulas. During this time, Darwin's theory of evolution deeply impressed me. The mechanism of natural selection seemed so logical that it appeared to eliminate the need for any creative power. When I started studying physics at MIT, my surroundings were filled with secular academics and students. Of course, there were religious people among the professors, teaching assistants, and friends I met here. But these were usually kept in the personal belief category. They never came up in scientific discussions. When I took quantum mechanics, in my freshman year, I began to understand how complex the fundamental structure of the universe is. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Schrödinger's cat, wave-particle duality. These excited me but also worried me. While I had thought the universe was deterministic, learning that at the quantum level everything is based on probabilities shook my worldview. Discussions with Sarah, whom I met in my sophomore year, shaped this period. She came from a Methodist family but had begun losing her faith during her scientific education. We spent hours together talking about questions like, if God exists, why is there evil? Or if the universe started with the Big Bang, who started it? Ultimately, we both settled into an agnostic position. We can't know, and maybe we don't need to know. During this time, I often read new atheist writers like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris in the school library. After reading The God Delusion, I was particularly struck by their arguments on evolution. Dawkins' blind watchmaker metaphor seemed perfectly logical. Nature could create complex structures without needing a designer. I chose cosmology for my PhD thesis. I was working on the large-scale structure of the universe, dark matter, and dark energy. This period was a turning point for me, both intellectually and personally. My advisor, Dr. Reynolds, was an experienced astrophysicist who had done his PhD at Harvard and worked at NASA. He called himself agnostic, but was extremely meticulous and passionate in his scientific work. The most important thing I learned from him was to be aware of the power and the limits of the scientific method. "Alex," he said to me one day, "science answers how questions for us, but it can't always answer why questions. We can observe that the universe is expanding, but we don't know why it's expanding. Physical laws work, but we don't know why these laws exist and not others. I started pondering these words. Science truly could explain observable phenomena, but it seemed unable to answer ultimate questions. Why did the universe exist? Why did everything appear suddenly when there was nothing? Where did physical laws come from? While writing my PhD thesis, I was surprised to realize that dark matter makes up 85% of the matter in the universe, but we still don't know what it is. No matter how powerful science is, a large part of the universe is still filled with unknowns. During the third year of my PhD, an argument with my family began to create the first cracks in my worldview. When I returned home for Christmas break, my father was talking about a new research project. He was working on explaining the complexity in biological systems through mathematical models. You know, Alex, my father said, the more research I do, the more I see how perfect the order in nature is. It's as if everything was pre-planned. This statement surprised me. My scientist father seemed to be implying design. Dad, isn't that just natural selection? I asked. Of course it is, he said, but natural selection requires very specific conditions to work. The physical constants are precisely tuned for evolution to occur. If the strong nuclear force were slightly different, stars couldn't form and carbon couldn't be produced. This conversation unsettled me. My father wasn't openly religious, but his scientific observations were leading him to some metaphysical questions. That night, I thought long and hard in my room. The fine-tuning problem was real and debated among scientists. For life to exist in the universe, physical constants needed to be incredibly, precisely adjusted. In my fourth year of PhD, I unexpectedly encountered the history of Islamic science. I was preparing a research project for a cosmology course and examining the influences of ancient astronomy on modern astronomy. While researching in the library, I found a book about astronomical studies during the Islamic Golden Age. Initially, I opened the book out of historical curiosity, but what I read deeply moved me. I began learning about the work of scientists like al-Biruni ibn al-Haytham and Omar. These people not only made groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and physics, but they were also deeply devout Muslims. Ibn al-Haytham caught my attention the most, considered the father of the modern scientific method. He laid the foundations of experimental methodology and made very important studies in optics. In his book, he wrote, "Truth is found through experiment and observation. We must not blindly follow authorities." How is this possible? How could a Muslim scientist be such a pioneer of modern scientific thought? There was a huge contradiction between the stereotypes I had about Islam, anti-science, anti-reason, and this reality. I started researching more. I learned about the work done at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the Islamic Golden Age, the libraries in Andalusia, and how Muslim scientists preserved and advanced ancient Greek works. These scientists saw scientific research as a way to understand Allah's creation. My curiosity shifted from the history of Islamic science to the Qur'an. I had read that there were verses in the Qur'an about scientific facts, but initially, I thought they were exaggerated interpretations. However, I decided to examine them objectively. I was surprised when I read the verses about embryology. In a text written in the 7th century, the stages of human development resembled modern embryological findings. There were also striking statements about the water cycle, the geological functions of mountains and ocean currents. As a physicist, I tried to explain these verses as metaphors that coincidentally overlapped with scientific truths. But some details were truly impressive, especially the verse about the expansion of the universe. We built the heaven with might, and we are surely expanding it. This was a statement very similar to Hubble's discovery of the universe's expansion in 1929. Of course, certain interpretations were needed for these two perfectly matched scientific discoveries, but it was still impressive. At the very least, I saw that these verses did not contradict scientific thought. My scientific curiosity expanded towards Islamic philosophy. I started reading philosophers like al-Ghazali, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd Averroes. Their views on the relationship between reason and revelation deeply impressed me, especially the ideas I encountered in al-Ghazali's Ihya al-Din revival of the religious sciences created a revolution in my mind. Ghazali supported scientific inquiry while also emphasizing the limits of reason. For him, reason was a tool given to understand Allah's creation, but it also needed revelation to reach ultimate truths. This approach began to make sense to me. Science allowed us to understand the physical world, but it remained silent on matters like purpose, meaning, and value. As a scientist, there were things I could observe, but questions like why I lived or what the purpose of life was remained outside science's scope. In my 5th year of PhD, I experienced a personal crisis. I had finished my thesis and published articles in prestigious journals. Academically, everything was going well, but I felt a deep void inside. My relationship with Sarah had ended around that time, and I was lonely. I would go to the lab in the morning to do experiments, come home in the evening and watch TV. I went out with friends on weekends, but nothing seemed to fill this void. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I questioned myself. What good? Is all this scientific work? I understood the universe, but what did this understanding give me? When I died, a few papers and perhaps forgotten theories would be left behind. Did that have any meaning? These thoughts led me into depression. For several months, I completely lost my motivation. My advisor, Dr. Reynolds, must have noticed my situation because he said he wanted to talk to me. "Alex," he said, "scientific work isn't just discovery. It's also a personal journey. Sometimes we lose ourselves on this journey. Maybe you need to ask not just scientific questions, but existential questions too." This conversation made me think. Perhaps a purely scientific materialist worldview wasn't sufficient. Maybe, as a human, I needed to seek answers to deeper questions. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I picked up the books I had read about Islam again. I wasn't trying to learn Arabic to read the Qur'an, but I started reading English translations. I noticed that many verses deeply affected me, especially, these verses stayed in my mind. Everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies Allah. He is the Almighty, all-wise. Reading this verse, I began to think that the perfect order in nature couldn't be a coincidence. That night, I decided to pray for the first time in my life. I didn't know how to do it, but I spoke from my heart. If there really is a God, guide me. I've been preoccupied with science for so many years, but the void inside me isn't filling. If you want to show me the truth, show me. This prayer surprised me. As a scientist, someone who demanded empirical evidence, how could I do such a thing? But at that moment, I truly needed it. In the weeks after my prayer, small but meaningful changes began happening in my life. I couldn't tell if it was coincidence or Allah's guidance. But coincidences related to Islam started increasing around me. I started meeting Muslim students at the university. Ahmed, an Egyptian PhD student, worked in the physics department. He was very intelligent, calm, and humble. When I started talking to him, my prejudices about Islam began to slowly change. As a scientist, I used to think faith and reason were opposite until I discovered the harmony within Islam. Growing up in the cold, sterile air of the laboratory wouldn't be an exaggeration. My father was a quantum physics professor, and my mother was a researcher with a doctorate in biochemistry. Dinner table conversations at home usually revolved around the latest scientific discoveries, peer review processes, and the status of research grants. By the time I was 8, I was learning to examine cell structures under a microscope. By 10, I could understand basic chemical reactions. For a child growing up in this environment, religion was, at best, a relic of the past, and at worst, a collection of irrational superstitions. My parents weren't openly atheist. They were more like indifferent agnostics. The prevailing logic at home was, science gives us facts. Religion only provides comfort. In high school, I excelled particularly in math and physics. The perfect harmony in equations and the universal applicability of physical laws fascinated me. I thought the universe worked like a clock, and everything could be explained by mathematical formulas. During this time, Darwin's theory of evolution deeply impressed me. The mechanism of natural selection seemed so logical that it appeared to eliminate the need for any creative power. When I started studying physics at MIT, my surroundings were filled with secular academics and students. Of course, there were religious people among the professors, teaching assistants, and friends I met here. But these were usually kept in the personal belief category. They never came up in scientific discussions. When I took quantum mechanics, in my freshman year, I began to understand how complex the fundamental structure of the universe is. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Schrödinger's cat, wave-particle duality. These excited me but also worried me. While I had thought the universe was deterministic, learning that at the quantum level everything is based on probabilities shook my worldview. Discussions with Sarah, whom I met in my sophomore year, shaped this period. She came from a Methodist family but had begun losing her faith during her scientific education. We spent hours together talking about questions like, if God exists, why is there evil? Or if the universe started with the Big Bang, who started it? Ultimately, we both settled into an agnostic position. We can't know, and maybe we don't need to know. During this time, I often read new atheist writers like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris in the school library. After reading The God Delusion, I was particularly struck by their arguments on evolution. Dawkins' blind watchmaker metaphor seemed perfectly logical. Nature could create complex structures without needing a designer. I chose cosmology for my PhD thesis. I was working on the large-scale structure of the universe, dark matter, and dark energy. This period was a turning point for me, both intellectually and personally. My advisor, Dr. Reynolds, was an experienced astrophysicist who had done his PhD at Harvard and worked at NASA. He called himself agnostic, but was extremely meticulous and passionate in his scientific work. The most important thing I learned from him was to be aware of the power and the limits of the scientific method. "Alex," he said to me one day, "science answers how questions for us, but it can't always answer why questions. We can observe that the universe is expanding, but we don't know why it's expanding. Physical laws work, but we don't know why these laws exist and not others." I started pondering these words. Science truly could explain observable phenomena, but it seemed unable to answer ultimate questions. Why did the universe exist? Why did everything appear suddenly when there was nothing? Where did physical laws come from? While writing my PhD thesis, I was surprised to realize that dark matter makes up 85% of the matter in the universe, but we still don't know what it is. No matter how powerful science is, a large part of the universe is still filled with unknowns. Mike's materialist approach no longer satisfied me. I used to think like that too, but now it felt insufficient. I also encountered reactions at the university. Some professors and students couldn't understand my conversion to Islam. Dr. Reynolds, my advisor, was worried. "Alex, this decision could affect your scientific career. The academic world is secular. Being religious might cause problems." "Professor, I'm still the same scientist. My research continues with the same quality and rigor." "I know, but perception matters. People might not see you as objective. Indeed, some colleagues started acting distant. Especially when I defended Islam on political issues, I was accused of being biased. After becoming Muslim, I started praying 5 times a day. This led to changes in my lab routine. When I stopped experiments midway to pray the noon prayer, some friends looked at me strangely. "Alex, this is the critical stage of the experiment. How can you leave now?" Tom asked. "Tom, this is very important. To me, the experiment can wait, but the prayer time cannot be missed." "But isn't this disrespectful to your scientific work?" "On the contrary, prayer gives me peace and helps me focus. I work more efficiently." It was true. After praying, my mind felt clearer. My work became more systematic and productive. During my first Ramadan, I started fasting. This was a new experience in lab life. Working from morning to evening without food or drink was difficult at first, but then I started feeling more disciplined. My friends were curious. "Alex, isn't this harmful to your health?" they asked. "On the contrary, it's very beneficial. It provides both physical and mental discipline. I understand hungry people in the world better." Throughout Ramadan, my research didn't suffer at all. In fact, I noticed I was more focused. I started leaving the lab to go to the mosque for Friday prayers. This led to major changes in my social life. At the mosque, I met people from different professions: doctors, engineers, teachers, workers, all praying together. This sense of unity deeply moved me. I started attending Islamic discussions with Ahmed there. I learned about different aspects of Islam after becoming Muslim. I also made changes to my lifestyle. I stopped consuming pork and completely quit alcohol at first. These restrictions were difficult, especially at social events. Not drinking beer with my friends felt awkward. "Alex, just one beer. What harm could it do? They insisted. Friends, this is important to me. Please understand, over time, these things normalized. In fact, after quitting alcohol, I started feeling healthier after accepting Islam. I gained a new perspective in my scientific work. While observing the perfect order of the universe, I saw traces of Allah's creation. In my cosmology research, the fine-tuning of the universe began to make more sense. The precise adjustment of physical constants now seemed like the wisdom of the Creator, not coincidence. While writing a new paper, I used this sentence: "The perfect harmony in the structure of the universe is a sign of underlying order and purpose." This approach was deemed contrary to scientific objectivity by the editors. I had to remove the sentence. About a year after becoming Muslim, I met Ahmed's sister Fatma. She was also doing her PhD in America, specializing in mathematics. Fatma was both modern and religious. We had long conversations talking about science and religion. "Alex, you're very lucky," she said one day. "You can live science and faith together. Most people think they have to choose between the two. Fatma, they actually complement each. Other science shows me Allah's creation. Faith gives meaning to my scientific work." I decided to marry Fatma. Our families needed to meet, but my family hadn't yet accepted the situation. When I announced my marriage decision to my family, I faced strong reactions. "Alex, you're ruining your life by marrying a Muslim girl," my father said. "This girl will radicalize you further. Her being religious doesn't make her bad, but how will your children be raised? As Muslims, yes, we'll raise them with Islam, but we'll also teach them scientific thinking." After this conversation, my family decided not to attend the wedding. This saddened me, but I wouldn't back down from my decision. Fatma and I had an Islamic marriage ceremony, nikah. Only our Muslim friends and Fatma's family attended. My family wasn't there, but I was still very happy at the wedding ceremony. These words, spoken by the Imam, moved me. Marriage is the union of two people drawing closer to Allah together. Support each other, learn together, grow together. Married life with Fatma was beautiful. She helped me learn Islam more deeply, and I supported her in scientific matters. After getting married, efforts to reconcile with my family began, especially longing for a grandchild started softening. "Alex, maybe we misunderstood you," she said on the phone. "You look happy, Mom. I truly am happy. Islam gave me peace and put my life in order. And are you happy with that girl? Fatma, it's a wonderful wife. She's both smart and understanding. You'll love her." My mother's attitude began to change slowly. My father and Mike were still resistant, but at least I had reached my mother when Fatma got pregnant. We started making plans for our child's education. "We'll teach Islamic values, but also scientific thinking," I said to Fatma. "Of course, Islam already encourages science. Our child can be both religious and a scientist." These conversations made me very happy. I would teach my child to live faith and reason together. I successfully finished my PhD thesis. In my defense, I also explained how Islam had influenced my scientific work. "Does being religious affect your scientific objectivity?" one of the jury members asked. "On the contrary, it helps me be more objective. Islam encourages the search for truth. My being religious was a problem for some institutions, but finally, I found a position at a university with an understanding advisor. Here, I could continue my scientific work and live my faith. Over time, I started giving conferences on science and religion. I especially addressed young Muslim scientists. "Science and religion do not contradict," I said in my talks. "Both are ways of seeking truth. Science helps us understand Allah's creation." These talks garnered great interest. Many young people said they felt stuck between science and religion. "Professor, my family is religious but doesn't support science. Should I continue a scientific career?" "Of course, Islam encourages science. Explain the importance of science in Islam to your family." There were many such questions. My experience was guiding others. I decided to write a book to share my experiences. In my book titled From Science to Faith, A Physicist's Journey, I described my conversion process to Islam. In the book, I told about my scientific education, how I discovered Islam, the difficulties I faced with my family, and the harmony between religion and science. When the book was published, It caused a big stir. I received both positive and negative reactions. Muslim readers loved the book. Finally, someone explaining Islam in scientific language. They wrote, from the secular side, there were harsh criticisms. Comments like, how can a scientist be so naive? After my book was published, my father read it. This melted the iceberg. Between us, Alex, I read your book, he said on the phone. I understand your journey. Maybe I misjudged you. Dad, I'm still the same person. I just have meaning in my life now. I see. You look truly happy. Maybe this Islam has been good for you. This conversation made me very happy. Years later, there was peace between me and my father. Mike also softened over time, especially after my son was born. Becoming an uncle changed him. When my son Omar was born, a new chapter opened in my life. Giving him an Islamic name bothered the family at first, but they got used to it. This child is so beautiful, my mother said when she held him. What does his religion matter? Omar's birth united our family. Now they wanted to be grandparents. Now, I'm balancing between advancing my academic career and living Islam. I want to teach my son both scientific thinking and Islamic values. Fatma and I have plans to start a foundation. We will provide scientific education support to young Muslims. We must work for scientific development in the Muslim world, Fatma says. The new generation should be both religious and scientists. We will do our best to achieve this goal. The most important thing I learned on this years-long journey is that science and faith do not contradict. Both are tools that help us understand Allah's creation. Science explains the physical world. Faith gives meaning, purpose, and values to life. Together, they enable one to become a complete human being. Transforming from an agnostic scientist to a Muslim academic wasn't easy. I had conflicts with my family and faced academic difficulties. But in the end, everything fell into place now. While doing experiments in the lab, I see the intricacies of Allah's creation, the perfect order of the universe. The harmony of physical laws constantly remind me of the Creator. When I pray, I give thanks for my scientific work. When I read the Qur'an, I understand the signs in nature better. This balance has enriched my life. I no longer chase just scientific success. Spiritual development is also important now. As my son Omar grows up, I will teach him this. Science helps us understand Allah's creation. Faith teaches us to use this knowledge with wisdom. Perhaps in the future, he too will be a scientist. But whatever profession he chooses, he will use both his mind and his heart. This story isn't just my story. There are thousands of scientists worldwide who live science and faith together. They show that even in the 21st century, it is possible to believe in Allah and conduct scientific work, unraveling the secrets of the universe while worshiping the Creator. This is the path of the true scientist. At the end of this journey, I understood that the transition from agnosticism to Islam wasn't just a change of belief, but also a process of finding life's meaning. Science gave me answers to how questions. Islam gave me answers to why questions. And today, this adds even more meaning to my scientific work. In this new chapter of my life, I carry both my identity as a scientist and a Muslim with pride, because I understood that a true scientist is not just an observer, but also a thinker and a believer. This story doesn't end here, conveying this message to new generations. My son Omar will follow in his father's footsteps. He will both make scientific discoveries and earn Allah's pleasure. This is the story of my journey from agnosticism to Islam, the story of how I discovered the perfect harmony between science and faith.